The movie opens during the 19th century, where we see a 26-year-old woman, Eugénie Clary, who comes from a wealthy French aristocratic family. Currently, she's at the funeral of the famous French novelist Victor Hugo in Paris. Upon her return home, Eugénie's strict father inquires where she was, to which she lies, saying she was out meeting a friend. Her brother, Théophile, smiles as he realizes his sister's lying. To change the topic, he mentions a debate event that's taking place tomorrow. Eugénie asks if she can join him, but her father says no, reminding her that it's not appropriate for a lady to attend such events. After dinner, Eugénie holds a candle in front of a mirror and notices something strange, which seems to trigger a seizure-like experience. At the end of the occurrence, her grandmother notices this, but doesn't make a big deal about it. Later, Eugénie tends to her grandmother by gently combing her hair and then bids her goodnight. On her way back to her room, Eugénie hears whispers from the hallway and notices Théophile making out with another man. She then candidly smiles at the sight and quickly retreats to her room. In the morning, Théophile gets ready to head to the debate and is surprised to find Eugénie in his wagon, even though their father strictly forbade her from going. Eugénie explains that she isn't interested in attending the debate. Instead, she wants to be dropped off at a cafe on his way there. Théophile agrees to this plan, and the siblings set off on their journey. Later at the cafe, Eugénie sits across from a man who's reading a book about spirits. They exchange glances, and the man introduces himself. He immediately starts flirting, and though Eugénie's initially uncomfortable, she gradually becomes more at ease due to his sense of humor. She admits that she wasn't looking at him, but rather at the book he was reading. Therefore, the man lends her the book and asks her to return it once she's finished reading it. At night, Eugénie starts reading the book and is captivated by it. The book delves into the spirit world, its purpose, and human-spirit interactions. The following day, the siblings and their family join another wealthy family for an outing. The parents hope that the other family's daughter will catch Théophile's attention. Now, even though Théophile plays for the other team, he pretends to be interested in the girl to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, Eugénie notices her brother's discomfort and steps in, causing the girl to leave. But when Eugénie's father notices this, he gets extremely angry at her for causing hindrance to Théo's love affair. A few days later, it's Christmas, and Théophile and Eugénie start decorating the house together. However, when they go upstairs to search for ornaments, Eugénie experiences another one of her seizure episodes. Whispers creep out of the corner, and she freezes in fear, with her brother trying to comfort her. After the episode ends, Eugénie tells her brother that she can see spirits, and a young lady's spirit has been appearing to her for the past few days. This woman seems to need her help, but Eugénie doesn't know how to assist her. Eugénie says that initially she felt like a freak, but she began to feel more normal after reading the book the young man lent her at the cafe. Hearing this, Théophile is worried, as he's aware that society often treats girls like Eugénie unfairly because of her condition. He knows it's just a matter of time until the family takes matters into their own hands and takes action against her. One night, while Eugénie's brushing her grandmother's hair, she has yet another episode. In a possessed state, she abandons her task and starts blindly searching through her grandmother's dresser. Eventually, she finds a long-lost necklace of her grandmother, a gift from her late husband that's been missing for 40 years. With a mix of joy and confusion, her grandmother asks how she knew the necklace was there. In response, Eugénie explains that her late grandfather told her. Hearing this, Grandma hugs Eugénie and says that she did the right thing by sharing this moment with her. In the morning, Eugénie's mother wakes her up, but nothing seems amiss. With tears in her eyes, she informs Eugénie that her father has planned an outing for them. On the other hand, Eugénie agrees happily and starts preparing for the day. Later, she joins her father and brother in a carriage. However, on the way, Eugénie notices her father's travel bag and realizes that something's wrong. When she looks out the window, she's horrified to see a mental asylum. Eugénie pleads desperately with her brother and father, insisting that she's not insane. They refuse to listen. She's then forcibly taken from the wagon by the hospital's security. In the meantime, Théophile starts to vomit since he's terrified and ashamed of bringing his sister to this place. Inside the facility, the head nurse, Geneviève, examines Eugénie and sternly warns her that any disobedience will lead to solitary confinement. Eugénie is then led to her bedroom, where she's immediately taken aback by the scene. There are dozens of women, with half of them behaving inappropriately, trying to touch her. However, a girl named Louise comes to Eugénie's rescue and shoos the others away. Louise appears to be the most sane among them, although she also exhibits some eccentric behavior. She tells Eugénie that she's engaged to one of the doctors at the mental facility, and they have plans to marry soon. In the asylum, the nights are filled with nightmares and the anguished sounds of women, preventing Eugénie from getting any sleep. In the morning, she watches as Geneviève takes Louise somewhere. Later, Louise is brought into a large office where many doctors have gathered, including her lover, Dr. Jules, who smiles at her. The head doctor, Charcot, conducts a hypnosis session on Louise, using a tuning fork, and instructs her to touch herself. However, the doctors don't know that Louise has endured trauma from her uncle and is wrongly blamed for it by her aunt, which led to her confinement in the asylum. This session triggers a memory that sends Louise into spasms, and she suffers from an epileptic attack. Later in the infirmary, Louise is consoled by Geneviève, who tells her that she did extremely well. When Dr. Jules enters the room, he sends all the other staff away. He acts concerned for Louise, but in reality, he's a pervert who lusts after his patients and takes advantage of their situation. Apparently, Dr. Jules has promised Louise that he'll marry her after she gets better, so the poor woman lets him pleasure himself in front of her. One day, Eugenie tells Geneviève about a message from her deceased sister. Geneviève is skeptical and doesn't believe her, so to prove herself, Eugenie reveals detailed facts about Geneviève that no one knows, such as the letters she writes to her sister and the color of her sister's hair. Hearing this, Geneviève is deeply shocked, but she still refuses to believe Eugenie and leaves. The next day, it's finally Eugenie's turn to be examined by Dr. Charcot. She stands her ground, insisting that she can see spirits and she's not mentally ill. However, Dr. Charcot dismisses her beliefs and claims she has hysteria and prescribes her hydrotherapy. Frustrated by the outcome of their discussion, Eugenie angrily raises her voice at the nurse, making her situation even worse. Later, we witness the cruel practice of hydrotherapy, where patients are placed in a box filled with ice for extended hours until their bodies go numb and they no longer feel pain. Unfortunately, many women have lost their lives due to this brutal treatment, but the doctors still believe it's the best way to silence women. Eugenie refuses to cooperate at first, but eventually, the orderlies forcefully place her in the icy box and restrain her. The poor girl shivers and pleads for a while before ultimately giving up and accepting her fate. That night, while Geneviève is on her way home, she feels as if someone's following her. To her surprise, it's Théophile, who approaches her with a request. He asks Geneviève to give Eugenie the book about spirits that she's been reading before being sent to the asylum. He feels guilty for giving up on his sister and feels this is the least he can do for her. Later, Geneviève gets curious about the book and she ends up reading it the entire night. The next day, still shaken by the book about spirits, Geneviève approaches Eugenie. She then proposes a bargain that in exchange for the book and a means to connect with Théophile, she wants to speak to her dead sister. However, the book is not enough for Eugenie, who desires freedom, which is pretty much impossible. Nonetheless, Geneviève agrees to persuade Dr. Charcot of this. That night, Geneviève wakes up Eugenie and takes her to the office, hoping to communicate with her dead sister. Initially, Eugenie struggles to make contact, but a few moments later, the dead sister reaches out and informs Geneviève that their father has fallen ill in the kitchen. Geneviève then immediately rushes home and finds her father in an ailing condition. She tends to him, and when asked about how she knew about his illness, Geneviève confesses that she spoke with her dead sister through a girl at the asylum. To her dismay, her father scolds her and accuses her of having gone insane, just like her patients. One afternoon, Eugenie witnesses a patient who's driven to madness due to an overdose of medication. Shockingly, the doctors show no remorse and even make cruel jokes about her suffering. Eugenie's enraged by this, so she confronts the doctors, accusing them of using vulnerable women as their lab rats for their absurd medical experiments. She then threatens to expose their cruel practices and unethical conduct once she gets out of the place. Moments later, Eugenie's sedated and placed in isolation for a month to prevent her from influencing other women in the asylum. Dr. Charcot assigns a particularly cruel nurse named Jeanne to closely monitor Eugenie. She receives her meals through a small gap at the bottom of the door, and the windows in the room are only opened occasionally. It becomes clear that this so-called therapy is designed to break the patient's will. And as expected, as the days pass, Eugenie is slowly driven to the brink of insanity. One day, Jeanne enters Eugenie's isolation cell to deliver her meal and tries to have a conversation. Eugenie remains silent the whole time until she senses the presence of Jeanne's dead mother in the room. It turns out that Jeanne had placed her own mother in the asylum, and she died here as well. Initially, none of this seems to trouble Jeanne until Eugenie talks about her son, who was killed by Jeanne's mother. Hearing this, she breaks down in tears and clings to Eugenie, crying on her shoulder. However, moments later, she grabs Eugenie's hair and threatens her to never utter a word about her son again. Next, Jeanne storms out of Eugenie's room in anger and ends up colliding with one of the patients in the hallway. She dismisses it as a crazy person acting crazy again, unaware that the woman was sent by Geneviève to steal the keys to the isolation room. With the keys in hand, Geneviève visits Eugenie in isolation and communicates with her sister's spirit. During their conversation, Eugenie relays a message from her sister. She wants Geneviève to stop writing letters because they make her sad. Instead, she wants her to find happiness, live her life, and move on. Later that day, Geneviève informs Dr. Charcot that Eugenie has shown remarkable improvement since being moved to isolation. While he remains somewhat skeptical, he grants permission for Eugenie to rejoin the common ward. Upon leaving the dark isolation room, Eugenie meets and hugs Louise, who is now wheelchair-bound due to the brutal experiment she's endured. Days later, the asylum hosts its annual ball, a rare occasion where the women are allowed to dress up, dance, and briefly experience a normal life. Théophile also receives an invitation and joins the event to meet Eugenie. The siblings are happy to see each other, and they begin to dance along with the crowd. Meanwhile, Jeanne keeps a watchful eye on them. However, when she becomes momentarily distracted, Eugenie and her brother seize the chance to dance their way out of the bustling crowd. Then they successfully sneak into a room where Geneviève is waiting for them. On the other hand, the party quickly transforms into a madhouse. The savagery knows no bounds because the doctors get hideously drunk and begin taking advantage of patients who have no idea what's going on. Meanwhile, a very drunk Dr. Jules lets his inner devil take over and takes a paralyzed Louise to an isolated chamber where he forces himself onto her. As Jeanne comes closer, an unknown asylum patient suddenly grabs and hugs her, giving a distraction that allows Eugenie and Théophile to escape the hospital. Inside, chaos ensues as Dr. Jules is attacked by another patient after being discovered taking advantage of Louise. At the same time, Geneviève guides the siblings out of the hospital. As they get in the wagon, Geneviève locks the gate and decides to stay behind. Eugenie asks her to join them, but she refuses, stating that she's now free in the sense that she no longer blames herself for her younger sister's death. By the time Jeanne arrives with security, Eugenie and her brother have already left. Geneviève's actions are deemed rebellious, and she's declared mentally ill, becoming yet another victim of the asylum. Sadly, her father also doesn't intervene because he believes that being surrounded by ill women has turned her into one of them. The scene shifts to a few months later, and Eugenie now resides on the coast of France, far away from everything she once knew. For the first time in her life, she is happy and free. Eugenie continues to send letters to Geneviève, assuring her that her sister is always with her, offering protection and comfort. However, Eugenie feels bad that the person who helped her is now confined in the asylum. But Geneviève writes her back, saying that even though she's physically in the asylum, her spirit is free, especially knowing that her late sister is in a better place.